Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I'm the manager of visitor experience at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. Thank you guys for joining us today. Welcome back to everybody who's joined us before for our previous online programs. This series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics and stories about the trolley era and art collection that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And we're going to continue these as long as we have presenters. So if you have a program that fits our museum mission, please let me know. That would be anything about Pennsylvania transit, the trolley era, car builders, cities where our streetcars come from. If you have a program that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, we occasionally will host those as well. So please reach out anyway. So we'll have a full list of upcoming presentations on our website at patrolley.org. I know of two that I still need to put on there after tonight's, and we'll get to that later. But I'll share the link in our chat box of our website, so you can click on that. I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program, and anybody who's made a donation through our website this year. We really appreciate your support, especially of our virtual programs. Never thought that we'd be doing these this far past when we started them. I think we've hosted probably 60 Trolleyologies at this point, so we're still going, which is very exciting. Real quick introduction to our museum for those who might be new. We were established in 1954 as the Arden Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. We opened to visitors a few years later in 1963, and we're located along the former interurban route between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find over 50 trolleys, I think we're at 54 now, and electric railway cars at the museum. And we had over 48,000 visitors take the 4-mile scenic ride last year. And we're on track to beat that this year, which is very exciting. Couple updates, and they're not really updates. These are just really fun things that we've done. So some of our long distance viewers might not know, we had a terrible trolley tailgate early in October. And what we did was we ran the terrible trolley. We had a bunch of different breweries come out and serve samples, and we had a DJ and decorations, and it was a lot of fun. The family in the middle picture there came all the way from Houston, Texas, and has no connection to Pittsburgh, except they just love the Steelers, and they were in town for the game. And one of them follows us on social media, and we were so excited to hear that. So they heard about the event and came out. So we are trying out different things, especially these 21 and up events, and this one was a lot of fun. Another one we tried was Trolley Tales of Terror, and this featured ghost stories around the museum. You can see a couple of our storytellers and guides there. And of course, it included a spooky trolley ride as well. You can even see Michael Myers in the background of the photo on the right. So that was a lot of fun. We will do that again next year because this year sold out. Of course, the biggest event of the year is coming up, Santa Trolley. It's going to span 4 different weekends starting Black Friday, day after Thanksgiving. And tickets are on sale now. You can go to patrolley.org/events and find Santa Trolley on there. I do want to highlight that we have a couple sensory-friendly Santa trolleys for our visitors with different sensory needs. And those are going to be kind of quieter runs and different, a slightly different experience. So we're looking forward to hosting that. All right. Now I would like to introduce today's presenter, because that's why we're all here. Bob Wright is a lifelong resident of Philadelphia and has been riding transit from nearly day one and continues to do so 60-some years later. As a result of being part of a family that never owned a car, something not all that uncommon in South Philadelphia where he grew up, he got to ride transit quite a bit and consequently became a fan of the Philadelphia Transportation Company at a very young age. This continued once PTC was purchased by SEPTA. Bob grew up around the corner from the Route 29 trackless trolley and a few blocks from the Route 50 trolley and half a block from the Route 5 bus. His interest in transit led him to pursue a degree in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and he went on to the transportation engineering field, where he continues to serve as a consultant for both highway and transit projects with 45 years of experience in the profession. He has written several articles for publications on Philadelphia transit over the years, and railroads and transit remain a hobby as he continues to photograph and read about transit history. In his free time, in addition to his transit interests, Bob enjoys gardening, tinkering around the house, walking, bowling, an occasional attempt at golf, and following the Phillies, Eagles, and Flyers. He remains a fan of Big Five college basketball, which he has closely followed since he was a child. He's also an active member of several engineering and professional organizations. So at the end of this presentation, we'll have a question and answer session with Bob, but the chat box is going to be open throughout. So please feel free to enter questions and comments during the program, and we can get to those at the end. And just a note, we are recording this program so we can share it on YouTube at a later date. All right, at this point, I will ask everyone to turn off their videos so that we can minimize distractions. You'll notice your microphone is also muted. I'll invite everyone to turn those on at the end. Bob, if you are ready, take it away.
Okay, thank you. And I need to place the current share. Okay. And I think we're off. Let's see. Screen share.
Looks good on my end.
Okay, we'll try this. All right. And oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Thanks, Kristen. And I'm here in the land of the Eagles. You're out there in the land of the Stillers. So we'll see how that works out here. But we'll leave it at that. And we're almost in Pennsylvania with our report on PATCO. It touches Philadelphia a little bit, but mostly in South Jersey, hence the title, the South Jersey Rapid Transit Evolution. The last time we did this in chronological order, I did one of these before backward, but now we're doing it the right way. Left off at 1990 for no real significant reason, and we're charging forward in this one to take us to today. A few acknowledgments of resources that I've used. Also have one photo at the end that the presenter shared with, or a photographer shared with me. We'll note that, again, these resources are usually available. The New York City subway site's been a very good one for these things, and people have shared photos with me over the years. So you may see a photo that's yours, and again, it came from another source, so you can tell me if that was your picture. We'll start off at the beginning of 1990. Again, the situation as the line entered 1990, as we dropped off at the last time, there were a number of programs going on. The line was about 21 years old at this time, so I guess it was legal drinking age, but anyway, there were things that were happening. That the original fleet was being rehabbed. It had been around for a while and has a lot of use, so that was needed. The tracks across the Ben Franklin Bridge were in need of replacement. The Broadway station was being rebuilt into a transportation center. And there were a number of railroad bridges that went through Camden that the line uses. They were in need of rehabilitation. That was happening. The Ferry Avenue pocket track we talked about before was being revised. And some more parking spaces were found. So we're up to just over 12,000 spaces that were available to riders. PATCO and DRPA also looked at this as an opportunity where, again, they had basically used the fare box and tolls to fund what they've done. And the federal funding pipeline, I guess you want to call it that, was available to them. So it was UMTA at the time, now it's FTA. So they had an ability to match federal funding and use that for the transit system. So that opened up a lot of doors for them to go out and have some improvements done. And the challenges were there again. The potential expansion on the Jersey side was once again under consideration. That the line was successful, but the thought was that way back when this was originally considered, there were going to be lines to the south and to the north, and those lines probably should be looked at again. The ADA legislation that came along, Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, was going to have an impact. Again, some stations were going to have to be looked at to see how they were going to be made accessible. The fare card system, and here's an example of the fare card, the old MAG card there in the photo, that continued to be troublesome, and there were needed some sort of long-term solution to it. There were fixes here and there. The turnstiles were wearing out. They were getting undependable. And since most people that came onto the line came from another mode or transferred to another mode someplace, there was thought to have some kind of integrated fare device. That if somebody came from New Jersey Transit trains or buses, that they could have one instrument to get on PATCO, and then if they came across into Philadelphia and used SEPTA to get someplace, they wouldn't have to have three different things in their pockets. Yeah, but that was again something that the agencies are going to have to discuss and figure out. ADA was a consideration. Most of the old bridge line, the stairway access, PATCO did put a lot of escalators in. On the New Jersey side, all the new stations had escalators, and it was interesting how they were arranged. Some of them pointed up to the front of the platform, some of them pointed up to the back. The idea was to distribute the crowds, and it kind of worked. Some people decided, to be independent, take the stairs, but the escalators did a good job of evening out the crowds on the trains. Again, some of those were short term, some were longer term. The bridge track bed, structural work would be needed across the bridge. The rail would need to be replaced. That was going to be impactful because how would you do that? That work had to be done. It wasn't something where you could do it under live traffic efficiently. So it had to be planned. Again, trying to do this in phases was going to be expensive. So it was something that had to be thought out. With the fleet being the oldest cars being 22 years in service at this point, there was some thought given to what's going to happen. When are these going to be replaced? The cars were looked to have a 35 to 40 year service life, but the thought was, again, to get out there and keep the line running efficiently, maybe they needed to be replaced sooner. Again, keeping in mind, if you order new cars at the time, it was probably a 4 to 6 year lead time. There were probably zero domestic providers, so that had to be taken into consideration. And again, there's a funding program. If you replace the whole fleet, how are we going to pay for that? So it was something that had to be taken into consideration, had to be started to be put in the plan. A couple things we didn't include last time, putting them in here now. Again, there's a picture of the old Bridgeline cars and a little floor plan that was available. Again, Broad Street Subway, BMT dimensions, 67-foot cars, or ironically, 67-seated passengers. I think that's just coincidence. And the PATCO cars, when they came along, again, 67 foot 6 inches. And we squeezed 72 passengers into a single car, a little more into one of the married pairs. So again, just to throw that in, probably should have had that last time, but didn't have it. Again, platform extensions did happen also before 1990. The thought was that we could accommodate 6 cars throughout the new parts of the system. The old bridge line stations were built to accommodate 8 cars, so that happened well. That all kind of worked out. The Jersey stations basically had the accommodations there, the substructure for the platform extension. Somebody thought, we ought to have that in mind. And that happened. Most of the stations, again, they were done at either end of each end of the platform. So where you say the canopy stopped, that's where the platform used to stop. The canopies were not extended over the 8-car extensions there. And as it turned out, after all was said and done, the 8-car trains were very rarely used. There were some performance issues. One, if you do want to ride one, I don't know if they'll have it this year, but on Black Friday is usually Santa Claus Special that comes in from Lindenwold. Those have been 8 cars. That's about the only time in my memory that we've used these. And didn't mention at the beginning, but I'll mention it now. Some of the information I provide is anecdotal that I know, or I've talked to people where you see dates. It's information that we could get dates on. So some of this might be a little fuzzy because I'm not a youngster, and it may misplace dates a little bit. But where that happened, I tended to try to not provide dates, just to not confuse everybody, especially myself. Looking at the ADA accommodations, again, a lot of the New Jersey stations had steps up and down at the street level. So you would step down a couple steps or step up, and that's something that could easily be solved with ramps, that a ramp could be put in alongside a stairway and meet ADA. Elevators were going to be another issue, again, because high platform and grades differences between where you entered and where the trains pulled in at the platforms. You're going to need new structures. These couldn't really fit with the stair towers in the New Jersey stations, and in the bridge line, older construction, again, taken into consideration. And here you see the elevator at 8th Street. That's a that photo is from about a month ago. It's basically being rehabilitated at this point. But you can see how it's just fit in there between two stairways and drops down to the subway at the next level. This is at the mezzanine, and the fare gate's right there. I didn't pay to go in. I just took it from outside the fare gates. I cheated. The city actually owned the Lucas Street subway, again, leased it to PATCO. So now we'd have to coordinate with another agency to get the elevators in and figure out what they had to serve. An additional complication was that SEPTA owns the Market Street subway elevated. So at 8th and Market, you had to deal with 3 different agencies to make all this happen. So you can only imagine how fast that moved. On the city side, especially at 8th and Market, the idea was get one elevator down to the concourse, which could be shared by all the lines serving that area. And then the second elevator would go past the fare line down to either PATCO or the L or the Ridge Avenue subway. Was really just a connection from a couple stairs from the concourse level. At the 12th and 13th or 15th, 16th, that could be done at the Broad Street subway concourse. Same sort of situation. Have an elevator that gets one to the concourse or mezzanine level, and the other elevator goes past the fare line to the platform. ADA defined what it called a key station setup. It was the busiest stations or the stations near healthcare facilities and government offices where people that needed accessibility probably had the greatest need, that those facilities or whatever served them. So PATCO put together a key station plan, and this was what was put together. So you had 7 key stations, those with the blue wheelchair symbol, again, the highest ridership. Broadway, the transportation center, that was being built already with the transportation center construction, so that would be one. And Woodcrest, which was the last station that was built pre anything else here, that was station number 13. So PATCO was not triskaidekaphobic. They had 13 stations for a long time. The provisions were at the station for, in the original construction, for elevators. So it's just a matter of purchasing the elevator equipment and cabs and everything. But with the Broadway situation, it was interesting because that would open before any other elevator did. So you had one accessible station, which was basically useless unless you wanted to joyride, get on at Broadway, and then eventually get back off at Broadway. But later on, others came along. 2 other stations out of the 13 were identified as maybes that had some significance. One was 9th and 10th Locust, which was near a few hospitals. And again, the thought was, again, that could serve the people that needed accessibility the most. And Haddonfield, that was a very walkable area, plus very politically charged area. Haddonfield tends to get what it wants. Keep in mind from part 1, the line's all elevated, but ducks into a cut in Haddonfield because, again, Haddonfield gets what Haddonfield wants. They wanted the line out of sight, and they got it. Again, Woodcrest, that was built to add elevators in the future. The New Jersey stations, at first it was thought to be easy because we could just take one of those stairwells out and put the elevator in the stairwell. But the problem was, if you look at station evacuation, the codes always say you need 2 points. If something were to happen on a train or at the station, you need 2 points of access. So if you took one away from the elevator, that really started to get funny with fire codes. PATCO being a line that goes through a lot of local jurisdictions would have to deal with each of those to figure out if the jurisdiction would buy in. And the thought was, well, maybe we just build the elevator someplace else. So that was going to complicate things a little bit. The bridge line, as we mentioned, again, there was going to have to be some significant engineering done to find places to put these. Fortunately, there were stairways that could be used. There were a lot of stairway access on the bridge line stations. So there was a way that it could be done, and those were started to be investigated. As I mentioned, Broadway came along with the transportation center. That was, again, going to happen, and it did happen, and it was the only elevator on the line for a few years. So the planning, again, the explorations started to happen to see feasibility, and the programming of funding started to happen once the cost estimates started to roll in. That was going to be a multi-year effort, again, detailed engineering, elevator procurement. It's a long process to do that, and even after you get your plans in place, Elevators don't get bought off the shelf. It's going back to providers and manufacturers that don't have to basically custom build many of these. So the procurement process, again, to get the supplies and everything was going to be a little bit of a lengthy undertaking as well. So we mentioned expansion. And again, on the New Jersey side, the thought was, we wanted to go to Trenton, we wanted to go to Glassboro. And Trenton was something early on that was going to go probably more due east to Moorestown, but Trenton sort of won the battle there. And NJ Dots stepped in and said, well, why don't we build something on an existing freight line to tie Camden and Trenton together? And they kind of started to call it PATCO Light early on, but that never caught on. And it was basically, some kind of light rail option that would connect the PATCO. So not a one-seat ride, not PATCO standards, not to PATCO scale, but something that was probably more context sensitive to the area being served. And again, New Jersey took the ball there and started to look at that. For the southern extension, the idea became, we'll go down the New Jersey 55. That's a fairly new limited access highway that starts down near Deptford in southern New Jersey, goes almost to the shore points. There was a wide median, and the thought was, well, this line could go in a median like CTA does in Chicago and other places. I think BART does that too. It would use part of an existing Conrail freight line to get to New Jersey 55. And again, they started to look into what had to happen for there. But it all came down to, again, these three lines came together and used the bridge line. The bridge line had a limited capacity. Again, crossing the bridge was a slow process. Turning around in Center City was a slow process. So the thought was that at least Trenton would be a feeder. And if the Glassboro line came along, then it would just be two lines crossing the bridge. That could be a little easier to handle. But again, that impediment was there, and then that was a reality that had to be faced. And neither one of these went over well with the public. The public didn't like the Atlantic City rail line when that was being built, opposed it highly. It managed to get built. And then when these came along, they just saw this again as something being forced on them. They didn't like it. And a lot of people, this is a very suburban area, they saw these lines as a way that undesirables could get to their areas more easily. So that kind of argument, got to the political level. And it's kind of put things not quite on hold, but a little bit in a difficult situation. So that expansion sort of proceeded along slowly. But again, New Jersey Dot did look at the northern line, did a lot of evaluation, come up with some money, started to move that towards some kind of implementation. It was approved in 1996. And it was decided it was going to be a light rail line. Again, it runs along the Delaware River on the eastern side, pretty much on an old Conrail line that's part of the Camden and Amboy line, which was one of the first railroads, if not the first in the country. Dates back to the 1830s. Goes by the Roebling steel plant where the wire rope was made for a lot of early suspension bridges. So there's a lot of history in this corridor. But the Conrail line was going to be used. Electrification was thought of. It was expensive. So these went back to, again, look at European prototypes for light rail diesel vehicles. Those were decided to be placed on this line. And a new station was built at Trenton, right across the street from the Trenton Railroad Station of Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. So there are a lot of good connections here. And it's a line that has become popular, serves a lot of communities here, and provides a nice service for a lot of people. But the one limitation was sharing the Conrail line, which is still an active freight line in many places, forced it to look at the operations a little more closely. So basically, if you ride the river line, if you don't get the last train at 9 or so at night, you're out of luck, because that's when it shuts down. That's when it goes to sleep, and the freight operations take over. So a transit line that stops at 9 or so is not a great line to attract ridership, especially for late night venues. Ironically, the line ends at what's called the Entertainment Center in Camden, which is a concert venue. And again, with a line that you have to get out of there by 9 to get the last train, that really puts a damper on using the line to get to any kind of events there, unfortunately. But the line did move forward, opened in 2004. Again, used the diesel-powered vehicles, but the accommodations are there for electrification someday if it gets there, and it interfaces with PATCO at the Broadway terminal, which is now called the Walter Rand Transportation Center. So it's a little walking transfer there, fairly convenient, but again, it is a 2-seat ride to get downtown there. So it's not what it was hoped for, but it has provided the necessary transportation function there for the people that use it. Unfortunately, the line is the cars are over 20 years old at this point. They're not performing well, and there are some replacements that are going to have to be programmed. This line was operated by contract until very recently New Jersey Transit took over the operation and has had its issues with equipment failures and car availability. So all this talk about New Jersey side, again, DRPA, the Port Authority, is a bi-state agency. And the Pennsylvania side kept saying, okay, you want to expand in New Jersey, what are you going to do on our side? They wanted some fairness here. And the thought was, well, what can we do on the Philadelphia side? You're kind of restricted. But the reality was, again, what are the options? The Philadelphia side delivery brings you into one part of town. If you want to go someplace else, you've got to either transfer to SEPTA, again, pay another fare. So the thought was, is there something that we can do here to enhance the service? And you can see on the graphic, there's the bridge. At the abutments, it's about 10 stories between the bridge level and street level. And all the happenings was at the waterfront. The problem is on PATCO, the stations are further inland. So you've got to ride into City Hall or Broadway or Eaton Market and then find another way down to the waterfront, which is usually about a mile on either side. So what kind of connections do you have? And some folks did say, well, why don't we build a station in the abutments? When the abutments were originally built, there were accommodations for that trolley service that we talked about in part one that was going to run on the bridge. And as we go through, we'll show how that's not really that feasible. But again, the thought was that, how can we take advantage of development that was happening on the waterfront, places where people wanted to go? And part two of that was a lot of PATCO riders were headed out to the west side of the Schuylkill River in University City. There's a lot of big healthcare facilities out there, a couple of universities. So there was an employment sort of push that a lot of people were doing that. So let's maybe look at PATCO doing it for them. And again, here's what I mentioned, how do you get to the waterfronts? There's not really an easy way to do that. This is a plan of the Ben Franklin Bridge. I have it framed. It's sitting right over where I'm sitting right now. And you can see some of the details. And the abutments are not all that long, maybe a car length and a half here. You can see how tight it is with the tracks going through there. So even if this were to be able to be used, how would you get a platform in there? It would be a significant undertaking. And again, if you tried to build a 6 or 8 car platform, some of that was going to be hanging out in midair, 10 stories up. So not very, a little daunting for people riding this. I mean, there's people that ride the line that won't sit on the riverside of the train because they get a little squeamish about that little railing and if the car will go over it or whatever. But again, now you're going to put people walking out here. It's probably not a good idea. The anchorages, again, had provisions to move people from the street level to the track level. They were never used. The anchorages are kind of like a time capsule where they were just closed up and everything that's there looks like it's still from 1926. It's not open to the public anymore, but I did tour that a couple of times over the years, and it is an interesting place to watch. Again, the other problem was from an operational standpoint. At the anchorage, that's probably the most severe slope on the bridge. It's about 3.5% grade. The rail folks will know that's pretty steep for rail and adhesion and everything. And you're bringing cars that are coming downhill, in some cases or uphill, that have to come to a complete stop. And that's if you have slippery rails or something and you're right over the river, so it's often damp. Not a good place to stop, not a good place to have a station. So that was scuttled. So if you can't get the people to the station, maybe you have some way of getting the people from where the stations are to where they want to go. And PATCO did look at, again, in the options for better service in Philadelphia. One of the options was waterfront trolley, and a trolley that would tie from 8th and Market and Franklin Square, which was closed at the time, come down beneath the Ben Franklin Bridge on a street called Flora Street, into track along what I'll call Delaware Avenue, and some of you know as Christopher Columbus Boulevard, but I grew up near it when it was Delaware Avenue, so that's what it is to me. And the thought was that you could have modern light rail vehicles doing this. They looked at a couple of options, run along the waterfront, and use heritage trolleys as well, sort of have an attraction of both, and have something that would actually be an attraction in itself. So the thought was, again, get to 8th and Market. Maybe Franklin Square was another one, but again, that would have to be reopened. That would be on Flora Street beneath the Ben Franklin Bridge, where some of you old timers may remember the public service buses parked there when they came into town before going out in the afternoon. That's the street there is not closed off. They would use those old freight tracks in the median of Delaware Avenue alongside Penn's Landing and the waterfront. And again, the city said, if we do this, we'd like to have a heritage trolley operation. And I kind of worked on that way back when. There was also a museum operation that operated on the waterfront for a while, Buckingham Valley, which had its own collection. But at this point, it had been closed and the cars had been moved out. So the thought was bring those cars back, build the accommodations, go from there. And as you can see, there were a couple of different options. This would have given the very extensive waterfront service and allow, again, a 2-seat ride, unfortunately, but get you up along all these waterfront attractions, up as into the Northern Liberties part of town, to Fishtown, down as far as Pennsport in South Philadelphia, and not far from where I grew up, which would have been nice when I was growing up, but that ship has sailed. And again, you can see the stations here that would have been along this. But this went into the usual multi-agency problems, where again, who's going to run it? How many options are there? Too many people came in with their own agendas about where they should go and what it should cover, and it began to be sort of a Frankenstein of let's do this, let's do that, and SEPTA kind of backed out. Just got a little too complicated. And again, one of these things it would have been successful, but success, too many ideas and too many agendas, so it didn't happen. The second part of this was, well, we'll extend PATCO itself. And PATCO ends here at 15th and 16th and Locust, sort of in, I won't say in the middle of nowhere, but in the scheme of things, not really around too much activity. Most people, if you walk down 16th Street South or 15th Street in the morning, it's like the salmon going upstream. Everybody else is coming the other way on the narrow sidewalks, so you can see where they're going. And a lot of this was addressing two things. The blue line would have gone out on new alignment, went back into the Penn campus, and right down here, the old Civic Center, which is now a very extensive medical facility hub, Penn Hospital and Children's Hospital. And that's where a lot of riders were going. This would actually go to the 40th and Woodland subway surface portal and end there, and have a couple stops along the way to serve the intermediate points. The green line was the other option, run the subway up, cross back over Market Street, and then go onto the SEPTA Regional Rail right-of-way that comes out of the commuter tunnel here into the 30th Street Station. And each one of these would serve a similar purpose, to get people across the river and out to the institutions and the employment centers. The interesting thing was that the big orange star here, 20th and Market, would be sort of a super station, where you've got the Market Street elevated subway, you've got the subway surface lines that would all stop here. Today, the Market Street subway stops at 15th and then goes to 30th. There's nothing in between, because when the subway was built, there was very little here. There was a lot of railroad use and everything, but very little, let's say, attractions or places that people wanted to go. And if you did want to go there, the subway surface trolley stopped at 19th and 22nd, and that's how this is served today. In the time since then, a lot of this has become extensive office space, commercial development. There's a lot of residential happening here, and the city wanted to take the advantage of this to build a new subway station on the L at 20th Street, and then move the 19th Street subway surface station to 20th Street. So you can see the cash registers ringing this up. This got very expensive. I saw a number again in the late 90s of $500 million to do one station. Again, this is a place where the L's coming out of its tunnel. It would be a tough place to build anything and have to keep the lines viable and live. So it would be intricate in construction. And again, $500 million for this, keeping in mind the whole Center City commuter tunnel was built for $330 million in the early 80s. So to build one station for $500 million, again, not counting all the other subway or whatever that would go with it, and have no funding. Basically, it just didn't happen. So without any funding for either, the books were closed, and it's like, well, we're just going to live with what we have, and maybe someday we'll revisit, but it hasn't happened yet. So again, back to New Jersey, where things could happen. The river line opening up gave some rethought to whether the PATCO extension to Glassboro had to be a PATCO extension. Again, that 55 corridor, basically within that red box that you see, that was a place where, again, cheap construction in the median and had a lot of advantages, but that would limit where station locations would be. And a lot of this was developed or couldn't be developed for various reasons, preserved land. So that would start to limit stations and parking spaces. And that was starting to get a little iffy whether that could work. As I mentioned before, there was a lot of opposition from the community. They just didn't want it. And there was some thought that there's the Conrail line that runs through here now. Why can't we use that just the same as we used the line up to Trenton? That would have stations that were closer to the older communities. You can have a lot of walk up there as those communities have been sort of redeveloped and new folks are moving in. So there were some more benefits, more people that could benefit from the service, let's say. So the thought was, okay, we don't need to have a full-blown PATCO line. Let's go with another light rail line that could connect in downtown Camden with the river line and serve PATCO, where you would make the connection again up at Broadway, the Walter Grand Center. And this would better address the transportation needs locally and would be a little less for the community to oppose, where again, this was more oriented to the communities. Not to say that people bought in like crazy. People still oppose this because people can oppose. And this one, New Jersey Transit decided, okay, we'll let somebody else run this. So DRPA agreed to become the project manager to design and build that line. And that work is underway right now. So I'm not sure what the opening date is. I know there's extensive work going on. Haven't seen an opening date lately, but it's a coming. So keep our eyes on for it. So again, coming back into the 21st century, the expansions are sort of kaput. So now we have just what PATCO has, which continues to be successful. So again, the thought was, let's address those ADA issues. The Lindenwald elevator came along in 1996, 8th and Market 1998. So we're starting to get more elevators, more accessibility. And the stations, again, at this point, they're probably in use for about 30 years. They're starting to show the wear and tear. The old finishes, again, are the old finishes, so they look old, just like we do at home when things don't look so good. We replace them or upgrade them. So the same thing was happening here. Some of the support facilities, again, the power lines and the poles, you can see in the picture at the bottom left. There's a wood pole line along the embankment and the viaduct. The thought was, let's replace those. The wood poles were wearing out. They're all new fiberglass poles that now serve that. They'll probably get a little more life out of them than the wood. A lot of retaining walls because the embankments, again, there's always some drainage issues and some spalling and things. So the restorative work was planned for that. The Westmont Viaduct, which goes through Collingswood and Westmont, we can see in the upper right, there was some rehabilitation needed for that. The track structure was there with sort of direct fixation. It was a little noisy, so that came back with some rubber cushioning and plates and things like that. Not like highway bridges. Highway bridges often have problems because of salt usage for winter operations, and you get deterioration in concrete. So you really don't salt up here, so that was not really the issue. But you do have places that you can see like an expansion dam here where things butt up against each other. You need to look at that, spalling concrete or whatever. So that was undertaken, and a lot of repairs were made to the concrete. Again, just remedial things. Again, the thought was the Ben Franklin Bridge was something they kept putting off. That needed to happen, so let's try to get there. And that pesky fleet replacement was also on everybody's mind. We need to think about that as we get into the early 2000s. Again, FTA was able to fund a lot of this, the station improvements, the escalator upgrades. All the stations have escalators. Again, they were wearing out. They were upgraded. The ongoing elevator remaining program, 15th, 16th Ferry Avenue, Woodcrest got elevators. This one I get a kick out of. This is the 8th and Market concourse, the street level. It looks like a refrigerator to me. I don't know why, but some architects like that. I don't quite see it, but I guess we all have our own taste. This is a little classier one at 15th and Locust. And to fit this, the sidewalk actually had to be widened where that person's walking. The parking lane on 15th Street was taken out, and the sidewalk kind of wrapped around the elevator. And it's very cheek and jowl to the photo restaurant there. So really tight confines, but a nice, classy looking head house, which I think compared to the glass block monstrosity at 8th Street. But we all have our own preferences there. Support facilities, again, the power distribution, the rail track, all needed upgrades. So things were happening there. The New Jersey side, the station head houses were very utilitarian. So the finishes were changed. But there's a lot of glass block originally and no station names. So that was changed. One of the motivations to go to glass was, again, the changes in technology. There was a lot better quality glass available from an insulation standpoint. So that was wasn't around in the original construction. So that was used. The police liked this better too because they couldn't see through the glass block. So if there were an incident or something, and they came up, they could actually see now, or they'd have to go in and they couldn't see clearly through the glass block.
David Warner sorry, Bob, to interrupt, but yeah. David Warner commented that the glass box pays homage to the glass blocks used on the New Jersey stations.
Okay, I figured there was some rationale there, but I'm still lost on me. But I'm the engineer who has the 8 crayon box, and I don't know colors or finishes, but that's just me. But thanks for that, Dave. And again, the support facilities were being renewed. There's an escalator at 8th Street that's was made brand new. So this was a little more welcoming. There were no real station names. There were some signs that you can see, like the Westmont and the Lindenwold signs, stylized a little more to give you a sense of place. Again, at the platforms at the old bridge line, they were rehabilitated, new lighting, new finishes, different colors. Again, there was a color code for stations, and there might still be one. I don't know what it is, but I think that's where you see the different colors that were used for tiles and these column enclosures. Concourse, again, you can see in the lower left, the subway concourse is brightened up a little bit, made a little more friendly. Hopefully, a little more user accommodating. Same thing, on the Jersey side, Broadway, especially, there was a head house there, so a lot of natural light was able to be brought into the stations, and those things started to happen about this time. Again, the finishes on the New Jersey stations, also some upgrades there. The fare card was again one of those difficult things. Again, the old half moon turnstiles were replaced with these sort of push gates, which is a little more effective. The mag card system had to go. Again, that was replaced with what they called a freedom card. It's basically you could get a 1 or 2 trip ticket, which was a paper ticket with the magnetic strip on it. These old plastic cards would get bent up, and the strips weren't working right. You could see that they were pulled through the turnstile with that little opening you could see on the City Hall. It was a little circular opening, and that sort of pulled it through with a gear, and they were wearing out. So again, this more efficient system with a way you could either tap in or use the ticket through the slot to get inside. And the system didn't change as far as how you would buy it. The tickets would be purchased based on how far you were going, different stations, and the new fare gates were installed. And I thought I had an old mag card, which I can't find, but I have any number of these SEPTA 2 ride cards, which I only use 1 ride, and they're still hanging around. But that system was still something they had to look more into. That's how, if you were a regular rider, you'd buy these on the Jersey side. The station name was stamped on it. There was a second part of this that you would hand over for part 1 of the ride. And this was for part 2. And obviously, I took a lot of one-way rides, I guess, and couldn't use them, but still have them in my collection for whatever reason. Again, using all this new technology was good. If you bought a ticket, it still was a system where it did not accept bills, but you had to get change. And DRPA, for whatever reason, standardized on the Susan B. Anthony dollar coin. It ended up being one of the very few users of this. It's still there today. So if you have some in your pocket, you probably rode PATCO recently. But again, it worked out well. The new system sort of came in a little seamlessly. That came in 2007. Was able to take care of some of the problems that the old system had. And it set the round trip tickets, of which I have half shown there. There was another system on the New Jersey side, which was called bus rail, where you could take a New Jersey transit bus into or out of the station. They still use these sort of validated tickets, so the validators had to remain in use. And there was a lot of reverse commuting that was happening, that the line did generate that. So these tickets were only available from the Jersey stations way back when. You could get one from a SEPTA cashier on the Philadelphia side and then have it validated. It was very complicated. So that was changed a little bit. And again, with New Jersey Transit using these validators, that helped the reverse commuters, where if they were taking PATCO to a bus, they could use that special ticket and use the second half to come back. So the validators still had to be, the little stampers had to be kept for that operation. Again, when the Freedom Card was replaced, the recognition was that there were a lot of other riders using one line to get there, one other system, again, New Jersey Transit and or SEPTA. So they were looking for one card, and Freedom Card started to add that ability to be used on New Jersey Transit and SEPTA. So that was a step in a good direction, that you only had to carry one card instead of having to carry SEPTA tokens or whatever you used on New Jersey Transit. So things were happening in a positive way there. So that was a little sort of pesky thing that finally got a good replacement. But now the big decision time was coming, because, again, the fleet was still in need of replacement, and the bridge track and structure had to go as well. And they had programmed money. They were starting to amass money in their capital budgets to do this. And it's just a matter of, again, how are we going to do this? You know, now that we have the money, what do we do as far as implementing this and the process? So the bridge track replacement became a very big deal, if you can't imagine that. Now, if you look at the photo on the left, you can see what this looked like. The track was decent, but again, there was a lot of paint that was spalling. The concrete under this was starting to go, and again, the bridge was 75 years old at this time. That wasn't unusual. But you can see the bridge itself, and that the picture, the bridge structure had been painted just before this. So again, this was left out because it was known that this had to be treated special. So the bridge painting happens separately. And you can see on the right the finished product, where now you've got fresh paint and the rails look good, and the track bed, you can't tell, but it is in good shape structurally. There's all those facts and figures I threw in there, all the stuff that project bought, because that's what engineers like to tell you, all the quantities that we put into this. One thing that does happen, there was the old yard beneath the bridge in Camden that wasn't really used. A lot of that rail was replaced. There was paving put in there, and that supported the high rail equipment that the contractor used. So if you pass by there now, sometimes you'll see some of the high rail trucks or whatever, if they're private. But that yard isn't really used for car storage, and there's no third rail or anything, but that's used for maintenance vehicles. And because I'm an engineer, I have to throw some engineering, and this might qualify this to actually be professional development credit if you need that for your licenses or anything. I'm not going to count it for mine. But the bridge was repainted at this time, and it was probably about the 8th time it was repainted in its serviceable life. But this time, because there was so much thickness of paint that was on the bridge and on the members, they couldn't really get to test bolts or things like that were on the bridge, because they were all sort of painted locked shut. It's like if you painted a window shut. So the decision was made to completely take the paint down to the metal, which had not been done in the bridge's history. And you might say, well, what's that got to do with engineering? When you take this off, this is what's called the dead load of the bridge, the weight of the bridge itself. All that paint had a weight. So when you took this off, you actually unbalanced the loading on the bridge. So in preparation for this, if they started down one side, they had to sort of counterbalance the other side. So you didn't have this sort of problem that you had the bridge unbalanced or anything. And it was very, very kind of complicated. And people say, well, what's paint weigh? And again, the paint weighs a lot. It's if you have 7 or 8 coats on there's a lot of paint that came off there. But again, a lot of the hardware and everything, the bolts and the rivets, then were able to be inspected, replaced, or whatever, because they could actually be seen again where they were, just coated with these loads of paint on it. So it did take a little more, again, complication to do that. So, to do that, again, some preliminary work had to be done. Because this work was going to be done one track at a time, the switches at 8th and Market Street, the crossovers had to be rehabilitated. Sorry, because again, they're going to get more use. If you were on one side, if you're on the south side track, all the trains would be on the north side, so trains would have to cross over. And on the Jersey side, again, there's some switches had to be added west of City Hall to create a double crossover where there was only a single crossover that went from west to eastbound. Interestingly, at this time, between City Hall and Broadway, the line turns almost 90 degrees from going south to going east. And there was a double crossover in there, which when I first saw that, and it was way before I had an engineering degree, I just looked at it and said, I can't imagine that's workable. Some kind of switching and switch tracks on curved track, and apparently it was a problem. And this was an opportunity to remove that and not have any problems. I don't know if they had derailments or anything here, but just seemed ripe for something like that. So again, that single track operation would have to happen during specified windows, because end to end, if you left City Hall and went to 8th and Market, that was sort of a 5-minute run, give or take. So that would have to be, again, a train eastbound have to wait at 8th and Market until that westbound train cleared the bridge track. And again, that was going to play with headways and when can you do this? And again, it's going to slow down the work, because then you can only do piecemeal to have it back for peak hours or something. So that got going. Finally, in the August of 2013, wrapped up at the end of 2015. Again, $103 million to do it. And the keys to the project's success were in the planning. Again, the thought was, can we have some continuous track outages? And in the summertime, ridership tends to go down. So there were 2 separate 2-month continuous track outages planned where ridership was down a little bit and they could get away with varying headways. During the outages, work would have to happen around the clock, though. So you had 3 shifts of construction. Again, that adds up. That's expensive. And just to go back, here's a picture on the left at the abutment. And this would be where that platform, if you wanted to put that platform serving the abutment, would have to be in this confine. You can see somebody standing here. That's about as narrow as that is. So there would have to be considerable changes to the abutment to put any kind of stopping platform or anything there. And that's probably why it wasn't done. Again, this was the first time the RPA did this with the single tracking. That sped up the project completion, helped the contractor get it done, helped the work remain within budget. There were plans after this got going where, again, Monday seemed to be a slow ridership day. So the contractor was given a few long weekends. They would start right after the peak hour Friday, go until just before the peak on Tuesday, go for a long weekend, get 60 some hours or whatever that ended up to, and allow the contractor to get a lot more work done. This also impacted the bridge, because the only way to get to this track, you can see this is very close to where the vehicles are up in the upper right there, that the moving lane is right next to the track. So the right lane had to be taken out for concrete trucks to come in or rail delivery. So this also impacted the traffic moving across the bridge. That right lane was typically out when work was going on. The schedules were a little interesting during the outage because, again, it took 5 minutes or so to get through the one track, so the other trains had to be held. And typically in the morning, 2 or 3 inbounds would platoon over at once, and the outbounds would be held. And then you would have a bunch of outbound deadheads going over. So you had a lot of funny gaps in the train and the headways. And the riders had to get used to that, but most did. And again, this was done where a lot of that happened midday or weekend, so it wasn't totally impactful. But again, people had to get used to this, and it was interesting to see. I wrote it a couple of times during this period, and it was interesting to watch trains just whiz by 8th and Market, 3 or 4 at a time, to get outbound and get into that platoon, and then the next one would come along, wait, and when the inbound came along, then it would cross over and get back over to Camden. So it was kind of an innovative thing to do that. You can see here on the picture on the upper right, again, that the steel and the track beds all being replaced finally after 70 some years of service. The upper left there is that's what you have to do when you take paint off, especially lead-based paint. You have to cocoon the area and close it so the paint doesn't drift off into the air down into the river. And it gets vacuumed up. The lead paint is a hazardous material, so it has to be controlled and removed. And again, you can see the right lane is closed here so that vacuum truck can get all that paint out. So this was, again, not a fast operation, sort of a slow and deliberate one. Took time, unfortunately, and impacted service. But when all was said and done, again, there's some more of those facts and figures down there on a slide that I took off to the side here during the presentation, so it's a little crooked. But a lot of work was done. Again, the thought was this is probably a 50 to 60 year improvement, so this won't have to happen again for probably the rest of our lifetimes here. But again, something that was badly needed, and it did enhance service. The trains don't go over here all that fast, but this enabled the speeds to pick up just a little. So we did save about a minute or so in the schedule once this was all said and done. The other biggie, again, was let's look at the fleet. And the fleet was evaluated in 2009. Again, the oldest cars at that point, if you do the math, 40 years old. The youngest, just under that, probably high 20s, again, from 1980. So old cars, old fleet, perform well, have been maintained well. During their lifetimes, a few mini rehabs have been taken, mostly on the wiring, the electronics, and the working system. But the interiors still look the same. Very little, if anything, was done. You can see these were colors that, again, this is like the gas range you had from the 60s, those kind of colors, which don't quite make it. These days, they were a little worn and grimy. The colors started to fade. Just didn't look good, didn't look inviting. Again, a lot of the seats were wearing out. And in the evaluation, it was thought that the car bodies were in great shape. They're stainless steel, again, very corrosion resistant, that have been kept up well, no leaks or anything. And one option was put out there that, maybe we just rebuild what we have because those car bodies were in good shape. And if we go and look for a new provider, probably 4 to 6 years or worse to get new cars, could this be done more quickly? After some evaluation, it was thought, let's try it. They went in and they looked at this. Again, they would gut the insides, take care of the communications, the passenger amenities, security, mechanical improvements, upgrade the heating and air conditioning. But there was a constraint. Again, the fleet was 121 cars, and the constraint was like, how many can we take out of service at any one time? If it takes X number of months to rebuild these, they're going to be off the property, not available. The fleet was pretty well taxed in the peak hour. So the thought was that we could lose maybe 10% of the fleet at any given time. That means 12 cars could be off the property. And that even went further, that only 6 could be out. So you could have 6 leaving when 6 were coming back. But that was going to take time. Again, how long was that X months that would take to get these rehabbed? And that was going to be the impediment, that you were just going to have this where if something bigger came up and the rehab took longer, you were just going to have to deal with it. So DRPA did bite the bullet, got in there. The cars were shipped off the property to do this. And again, strangely enough, the traction motors would be retained and the trucks would be rehabbed at Lindenwold at the shop, but the rest of it would be done at Alstom in New York. Part of the other upgrade packages here, again, new communication systems, new interiors, new ceilings, blah, 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 the whole new 9 yards, thicker windows, passenger alarms, security cameras, improved braking. The cars did have a braking issue that they had faced during their lifetimes. And again, having regenerative capability so they could put more power back in as they braked where they had to. More of the same here. Again, the cars never had external speakers. They have very good internal speakers. So now announcements could be made at the trains that were heard on the platforms. Again, public address system improvements. The exterior destination and route signs would be improved. The electronic dots would replace what was there. The end signs were roll signs and mylar curtains. The Side signs were backlit in glass. Didn't always have the capability to change terminals, so you had certain terminals that were displayed. And again, full width cabs were going to be replacing what you had. And the picture in the upper right, that's a PATCO 2 car. The ones had a curtain there instead of this glass panel. The twos had the glass panel, and the precious rail fan seat would have to disappear with a full width cab. So that was going to be the loss there. You would lose some seating. But the thought was, again, that the operator was kind of open to anything where he was or she was. And their thought was maybe we need a little more security. There were a handful of incidents with operators having to deal with passengers, and this would sort of take care of that.
Dave says in the chat that the side wall of the cab in the photo was open. So there was, no security for the operator.
Yeah. The operator, if you sat in a rail fan seat, you could watch the operator. And of course, those of us that like to sit in a rail fan seat, we'd watch and observe. And the operator never asked, you want to take a spin? But I kind of hope, but that never happened. So didn't get the opportunity. But again, the cars, to do this, they had to be moved out to Elstone in New York. So this became a regular site where the car bodies got on a flatbed and started out of South Jersey and made the trip up there, and then came back later. And while there, again, you can see they were completely gutted. Everything was removed down to the frame. As work progressed, you can see the new colors, again, looking at grays and muted colors. And the single cars, they were all converted to married pairs. So you had the old operator's console and the window, and that was sort of sealed shut. A seat was placed in there, so that just became part of where the riders would sit, basically, part of the passenger capacity. If you look closely at the seats, if you ride SEPTA, the Silverliner 5s have the same seats, different colors. There's a more blue, so a popular seat at the time. And here's a rendering that showed how these cars would look brighter and cleaner, and the different color palettes that were suggested. This was taken out to a public process, and people voted on this. Of course, not everybody got what they wanted, but that happens sometimes. And as the cars started to come back, again, there was some rebranding here. But this is the new PATCO, so the new logo, and that got splashed all over the place, where you had the old one with the bridge arches and the two waves of water. This is just a stylized P that was applied to the cars. There were some little differences that you would see as they came back. Again, the cars didn't have the crowd pantographs. Those were added, and there were little straps here. When two cars were hooked together, the straps would hook together to have a continuous barrier, so people didn't walk between cars or walk accidentally onto the tracks. The marker lights that were up at the top here were just capped over. Again, there was just sort of one for when the car was moving forward and a red one for when it was moving the other way. They were removed. On the single cars, it was interesting that, again, you had this at both ends. On one end, it just had the windows replaced with fixed windows, and all the lights were capped. So the housings are still there. You can tell where they were, but they look a little different as I'll get into a slide here what the single cars look like. See, a little cleaner. You don't have the dark window treatment that you had in the past. That was all buffed off and made into stainless finish. And again, the electronic dock sign up at the front and on the side. Yeah, and there's that rail fan seat that's gone. So we liked it while we had it, but it's not there. But the second seat is sort of the almost rail fan seat. You do get an unobstructed view. When the cars are not lead cars, this door can close against the cab, so that seat can be used. But again, all you see is the car in front of you. You don't have the rail fan view. But again, this is sort of the replacement rail fan seat. These seats were previously side seats. It was changed to longitudinal. They fold up for ADA and wheelchair lockdown and things like that. So you didn't have that capability before. If a wheelchair passenger boarded, they basically went into the other side doorway and stood there or sat there, and they weren't locked in or anything. So it was an interesting ride. And here's a little Another nuance up at the blister at the front and at the back. Again, the next station announcement, you have automatic robot announcements, what's coming up, and a nice little reminder that you're at the end of the line when you get to the end of the line. Again, for the single units, I mentioned they had that single door when they were delivered. The thought was if they ran as singles, this could be used to admit passengers and collect fares, which was never done. And nice little cover here, which I didn't think to, it looks a little ugly to me, but I guess you do what you do. So that closed off that opening. That's one way to do it, but that's the way they chose. So again, that's all for personal taste. I just thought it could have been done better, but what do I know? Again, the operator's console, as you can see in the upper right, very different. You do not have that. This is what you would have before. There was a low-level door here, a half door, before the cars were rehabbed, so you could look right in and watch the operator if you were in a railfan seat. Now that cab is closed off entirely, and so the cars, as they looked, a lot cleaner than they had before, better finishes, upgraded colors, so things were improved, and the riders accepted this well. Again, monitors up at the bulkheads to show ads and show next station information and schedule changes and things like that. And again, if you sit, the picture on the left is a ride I took in the pseudo railfan seat, so you still got a nice look ahead. It's not like being right up front, but it's a good replacement. So again, that contract moved forward, $194 million when all was said and done. I did some funny math there. There's 121 cars, unfortunately. So 120 of 121 instead of 124 of 125. So I was 5 off there. I don't know how I did that. One car didn't get through. Car 116 had some issues and had a fire early on. It was used sort of as a parts donor. That did not go through the program, so 120 cars did. And again, the restriction of 6 cars at any time off the property got a little dicey at the early. Again, there was the early parts of the program. There was the learning curve that you would expect. Some of the early cars took a little longer than they thought. Again, as you get into these things, when you do any kind of rehab job, you often find things that you didn't think about or weren't as obvious that now had to be addressed. So once that learning curve got over, again, the program moved forward a little better. Again, the first 6 cars came back in 2 years, 2013, back in service in 2015. The last ones came back in June of 2017. And PATCO ran just before the last 6 cars left to go to rehab. PATCO ran sort of an old car special. And I remember taking that, and it was a lot. It was very different to watch the new cars pass by, and they sounded a little different and looked a little different, but it was the same old cars. The expectation of life in these is I've seen different numbers. The URPA says 30. I've seen 25 in some places. I've seen 40. So I'll go with what the URPA said, 30, which means, again, 25 or so years from now, we're going to have to think about what we do again. The cars were renumbered. They got to be known as the 1000 series cars. And there was a lot of discussion about how they're going to renumber these. And the thought was, again, when they leave the property and come back, you just change the number. If you were car 101 when you left the property, you were 1101 when you came back. So it wasn't in order of when they left or how they came back. So again, the single units 101 to 115 became 1101 to 1115, 1117 to 125 became 1116 to 124 because 116 wasn't replaced. Then again, 115 and 117 were paired, so that would have been 115, 116. And 201, the original married pairs, just got the numbers changed to 1001 to 1096. And again, more shots of cars. We had a little practice run the other day, and I was kidding Christine. Here was another rail fan, or Kristen, sorry. It's another rail fan here when I was taking this picture who wouldn't move. And I just said, like, I want to take a picture. He said, I'm taking pictures. And I said, get a shot. So he's in the shot. He was a little obstinate. And then, then he decided afterwards, he apologizes. I should have moved. Okay. But anyway. So it's the rail fan code there of, respect the photo line is something I still live by, but apparently not everybody does. So, again, recent features and improvements. A lot of LCD monitors have been put up to display ads and train information, schedules, things like that. And the countdown clocks have been installed. At first, a lot of these came up and would say next westbound and next eastbound. And the signs do say, as you can see that little sign below, eastbound Lindenwold, westbound Philadelphia. A lot of riders were not sure of what was going on with that. And, they would ride every day, but westbound and eastbound, for some reason, their compasses didn't work. So it has been changed to say where the trains are going. This is helpful too, because not every train goes to the easternmost terminal, Lindenwold. Some trains do short at Woodcrest or Ferry Avenue, and in the recent schedules, this hasn't happened as much. But this is an example where I was waiting at Broadway back in the summer. This train is actually eastbound, but on the westbound track. So again, if you were saying what's eastbound and westbound, I could see where there'd be some confusion. But for some reason, they came through on wrong route, and I knew not to take it, but I'm not sure everybody else did. Again, that second round of elevators started to go in, starting in around 2017 when the design work was completed. So just about all the other stations that were there got handled under that program that wrapped up a couple of years ago. And here's a solution that was installed at Haddonfield. Again, a whole new station wing and elevator bank outside of the usual stairways. Again, this is after the Fair Line. And this took care of, how do we get down there using one of the stairways, which we couldn't sacrifice. So a whole new structure was built. You'll see these on the Jersey stations. The newer stations have these whole structures that were put in. Again, another one at Collingswood, just off to the west of the current station lobby. And then came the pandemic. And the unfortunate thing was PATCO had a record year in 2019 of ridership, and things were looking up, and then everything collapsed sort of. And when things got to sort of the bottom point, ridership dropped by half. PATCO kept moving, and actually PATCO extended the train lengths because they figured social distancing, get people further apart. Started to go with 4 cars off peak, just to spread out the riders. In the peak hour, they added a quiet car. It was the last car for some reason. Again, there's no attendant in the last car, so I guess it's all in the honor system. If it works as well as SEPTA's, which it doesn't work so well in SEPTA, I guess that's something to continue. But in a reaction to the ridership drop, some stations were closed. 1213, City Hall, Westmont, and Ashland were closed. Didn't last long. The stations were closed toward the end of March and reopened late September when it seemed that some of the riders were coming back. But again, to look at the facts and figures, the ridership dropped to almost 8% of normal in late March, which again was when some stations were closed, and there was some talk about reduced service, but that didn't really happen as much as it could have. It came back a little bit that December. It came back a little more in August of 2021. Today, it's about 19,400 daily trips. Again, back in 1994 was the highest, and it was about 32,000 then. So you can see that was a drop. Again, part of this is related to people being able to work from home and alternate hours and things. So it's not totally just pandemic, but you can see the comparison that 2019, over 11 million riders. That was the highest since 1994. 2024, about half of that. But again, it's coming back slowly. And again, the reverse commute is something that continues to build ridership and serve the riders. But of course, with the ridership drop, revenue losses came along, and you almost had 17 million less in revenue in 2021. That's starting to inch back a little also with the ridership changing. And through all that, and again, actually before the pandemic, Franklin Square came walking around again. And again, I mentioned earlier, is PATCO triskaidekaphobic? It probably isn't, because it has 13 stations, but it decided that at number 14, so maybe that kicked in. And Franklin Square became someplace again. About 2017, they started to look at. And the reason they started to look at it was it's at Franklin Square, one of the five squares that William Penn founded in Philadelphia, probably the least busy of the five squares. It's kind of a desolate area, but it's an area that's starting to come back with residential and a little vibrancy and concert venues and things like that. So the square itself is there's a carousel there, a miniature golf course, a lot of things happening there. So there was a demand that was seen here that people, PATCO did ask people, would you use this? And people were saying yes. There were facilities for people to go to work there and get entertainment, things like that, residential. That the redevelopment is kind of pushing that, and they decided again. PATCO decided that we're going to reopen this, but it would need a major rehab. And that picture down in the lower right was we had that the last presentation. That was what it used to look like when it was open with the bridge line. It was reopened in 1976. Had a very minimal head house and entrance. But the thought was that this time we're going to make it something much more grand. So there was a budget of $30 million. Design started back in 2017. Plans were completed, and construction started right after the pandemic. That delayed things a little bit because there were different construction protocols during the pandemic with workers having to have social distancing and everything. So it took a little longer than they thought. But again, in March 2025, construction was complete. Earlier this year, as construction was looking to be complete, that became the big mystery. When's this thing going to open? And PATCO was surprisingly mum about this, that the people were pressing like, we want to see this, we want to see this. And it almost happened within a week that toward the end of March, an announcement came out, we're going to reopen it on April 3rd. And they reopened it, I think it was a Thursday. It was a very odd time, but that's when they decided. And everybody was happy. You can see some of the perspectives. A lot of work was done to improve things here. Again, you had to make it ADA accessible. Nice glass head house. The squares behind it, you'd see in the upper left. And the upper right, again, here's a plan of the square and where the head house and everything's located. You barely see in the dotted lines where the trains go through the square. And again, this is right after the trains come off the bridge, so the tunnels are that far apart that they come together to come down East Street. And again, more shots of what was, excuse me, you had a little plan that's a little fuzzy in the lower right, just showing again the alignment. This is going back to the original construction and some modifications as to where those head houses would go. And view of the platform, the upper right, what it was at one time, and the center bottom picture, you can see what it is today with the new trains, and the perspective in the upper left of where the trains are, a little cutaway as compared to where the square and the head house is. So this was a well-received improvement. The ridership is picking up. It's past the novelty stage, so it's not just people riding just to take a look at it. Again, very nice station, very well done, and again, picking up ridership. All right, and to sort of wrap this up here again, PATCO's popularity is picking up. It's going well, and it always had overnight service. And overnight service was at best half-hour headways, at worst an hour. An hour was basically a single train back and forth. Police usually rode the train just in case. There weren't really incidents, but the police, just the thought that made the riders feel a little better. But there were a lot of problems in the concourse in Center City, Philadelphia. You have the homeless and other issues that you have there that would encamp and made the place a little dingy and dirty. So PATCO decided, we'll close down, and it just started in September. The overnight service on weeknights is gone, and that's when the concourse is closed and the deep cleaning is started. So part of this is, again, it's not a permanent thing. Wanted to see how the ridership reacted. Fridays and Saturday nights, it still runs because there is sufficient demand for it, I guess, with entertainment and people in bars and things like that. So this isn't permanent, but the thought was that PATCO has seen where the ridership on some of these trains was in the single digits, whether it was worth running trains to to provide this service overnight. And again, if you take it away, those people don't have an option. There's New Jersey Transit buses don't run overnight. But the thought was again, how little service can we provide? If we can go back to that hourly headway or something and publicize it, then people would know when the trains are coming, so they're not standing on platforms all night waiting for a train. So this is sort of still a work in progress that PATCO is going to evaluate. And the thought was this is probably in effect for at least the next 6 months, and when the stations get cleaned up and everything's back to good, some probably more long-range decisions will be made as far as what that's going to entail as far as overnight service. So that pretty much wraps it up. Again, some shots of the old and the new, and I like this shot of the snow there. PATCO runs no matter what, just like the mail goes through, PATCO goes through. And this shot again, Michael Pearson was nice enough to share this. A nice little shot of riding off into the sunset. He took it a couple of weeks ago and shared it with me. And here's the train coming off the bridge, coming into Philadelphia, about to enter the subway. Just getting dark enough that the street lights are on. But nice little shot of the train as it's coming in, and it's pretty much the end. So if we have any questions, I wanted to show my squeezy PATCO stress buster toys. There's one. You can see how old and decrepit the older one is, and there's the refurbished train, which is in much better shape. So it hasn't gotten as much squeezing, I guess.
I was going to say, so, well squeezed.
Yeah. My stress toys get a lot of work, unfortunately. So. Okay.
Excellent. Before we get into questions, I do want to mention a couple things. Bob, if you want to take this time, there were lots of interesting fare collection and transfer discussions. And we'll get to that in just one second. But I did want to let people know real quick what's coming up next at the Trolley Museum, specifically regarding Trolleyology. Next month, we're going to have a presentation about Eastern Ohio interurbans, the Columbus, Newark, and Zanesville interurban line from Steve Bonus. If anyone is a member of the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association, Steve recently presented this for them, and it was really, really good. And he reached out to me and offered it to us for Trolleyology, which is exciting. And then December 16th, a lot of you have been asking me, when are we going to do something about the terrible trolley? So this is the night, the terrible Trolleyology, if you will. And it's going to be presented by Michael Bukta, Janine, our executive director. Michael is the project manager. Kevin Zebley, who's our director of facilities, operations, and safety, who also worked on this restoration. And then I'll probably add in some stuff too. So that'll be December 16th. And that's about all I've got coming up for us. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you especially to Bob for presenting. Let me get to any of the specific questions here.
Yes, I see what's in the chat. Let's see. I start.
Yeah.
Rebuilding the fleet. Rebuilding the fleet was the smartest thing to do. We'll see. There were some hiccups during the process. They didn't get them back as quickly as they wanted. There have been some things that had to be tweaked since then. I mean, the fleet's operating fine, but there's always a second guessers. I know some people said like they should have just bought new, but when new comes, you have to keep some of the old too, because the new doesn't always work so well, and sometimes you got to take it out of service. So it could have been, but it was a risk, I think, to do that. Again, if there was a major fleet-wide retrofit or something, all the cars would have to be taken out of service. So it was one of those things where, you could argue either way. I think it's done, and that's what you have. So
sure,
but it was a nice job. I mean, if you look at what you had, especially from what the passenger sees, it was when I first boarded one of those things. It was like night and day, with how bright they were and how the colors were much nicer, cleaner, just looked a lot nicer. So.
Yeah. And I invite folks to turn on their videos now. I forgot to do that. So if you'd like to turn that on, feel free. And also, everyone should be able to unmute themselves as well. So if you'd like to pop in with even one of the comments that you put in the chat, Ray Janasco says, great presentation. Time to go ride it again. So,
Mhm. Yeah, this is not the Newark subway. That's 90 miles away. Let's see.
yeah, there's lots of color commentary this
Yeah,
too.
I
Yeah.
keep opening a new one and it takes me back to the end here. So I can
Oh,
set back
whoops.
up. Let's see. Broad Street Station approach track. Yeah, the Broad Street Pennsylvania Railroad Station occupied the whole block between Market and what's now Kennedy Boulevard, all the way down from 30th Street area down to Broad Street. And I sit in an office building which occupies that. I have a picture of what it was, and some of my younger counterparts would say, like, what is that? And I'll tell them, so we sit where a train station was, basically.
Whoops.
So that was, and that when that was removed, that opened up that whole area for redevelopment, office buildings, and everything that's there today. The L tunnel was designed with local. Yeah, okay, got that. The local New Jersey political opposition to extensions was basically just reflecting what the residents wanted, and the residents, they didn't want Camden coming into South Jersey, which won't get into the particulars, but you can connect the dots there. But the thought was, again, especially when the Atlantic City line was built, there were a lot of grade crossings, and people thought that there was going to be carnage because trains would run people over. And if you listen to the bells and whistles and watch the flashing lights and the gates, you won't get run over. But there was just an incident on the River Line not too long ago where somebody did get hit by a River Line train, and again, all the devices were working. So you have to heed the devices. I think that's the key.
David, I saw you unmuted. I didn't know if you wanted to chime in with anything, but
yeah. So
sorry, both. I meant David Black, but David Warner, you as well.
Yeah. And Dave Warner had a question about New Jersey Transit is taking over management of the project, and they're getting into it. But yeah, DRPA has been the project manager thus far. But I know it's not going fast enough. I think is part of the problem. So.
So I'll be the ringer here because my company is part of the GCL consortium.
I know.
And New Jersey Transit has taken over because DRPA didn't want. Actually, nobody wanted it.
Yeah.
South Jersey Transportation Authority, New Jersey Transit, DRPA. DRPA thinks of themselves very much as a bridge company that happens to tolerate a rail line.
Yeah, and they're also I know they're also still running some contracts for different things. There was a bridge that was just put out not too long ago, so they still have sort of a pinky in it, I guess, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it's one of those political things. Yeah, the homemade turnstile rear gate. Yeah, I remember that they experimented with a lot of things on the line.
Yeah. Well, those gates though, they last about 20, 25 years. We retired them.
Yeah.
Okay, another ringer. You have been describing the 8 years of my history here, so it's been very interesting to hear someone. Gee, what do we think you did? But the fare gates were homegrown because, as you correctly said, the original I forget Half Moon gates you just called them.
Yeah,
they just
described. Yeah,
they didn't work very well. So
I remember getting caught, and I mean it was a 2-stage thing where you put your card in, one half open, and you got in the middle, and then the other half open when you picked your card out. And they didn't always work that well, and you sort of had to nudge them sometime. I mean, it was a little bulky, but
yeah. And actually, a plug for the Trolley Museum. The Trolley Museum owns some of the gates and one of the old fare machines, which will hopefully eventually be put up in one of the new buildings.
Yeah, it always sounded like something out of like Star Trek or something, like the way that had the little hum when they opened it. It was like you were being beamed up or something. It's just very strange sound. But right, you got the comment about the SEPTA cards.
SEPTA cards actually 2 uses. In addition to PATCO selling them as SEPTA round trips in New Jersey, in Philly you could trade a SEPTA transfer plus a little bit of extra fare for one of those cards, which after validation in New Jersey was good for the subway SEPTA fare on the way back.
Yeah.
I reverse commute on PATCO when I was in college, and I also remember the first generation tickets were actually color coded, so that you the color told you where you were going. I was the first commuting to Ferry Avenue, which was orange.
Oh. Yeah, the one I had was City Hall and Broadway, which was red. I forget. Green might have been Haddonfield and those. Yeah, but you had there was a method to the madness. The problem you always had, and I always started on the Philly side, so you had to go to the subway cashier who sat next to the validator and push the button into this booth to get that, and then get it validated when you came back. And it was always it was almost like you were bothering the cashier to do this.
Yeah,
it was like, why did they
Cashiers weren't fond, and some of them didn't understand the notion of presenting a subway transfer to get another transfer.
Yeah, I went to college with a guy who used it coming over and going back, and he said, about half the time the subway cashier, 34th or 30th, would not take the second half of the ticket because they didn't, like, what is this? And it's, just it was interesting. Then they would take it and say, well, we'll take it this time. Okay, well, that's all I need.
Yeah, for the reverse commute, the cashiers at 8th and Market knew what those tickets were when you were coming off of PATCO, but some of them didn't quite understand that you had that they also had to sell them.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love the history of fare collection and how it's evolved over the years. And I think that would make a very interesting exhibit someday. I don't know, I might be the only one, but I like that stuff.
Yeah. I see the comment about that's what SEPTA should have done with the M3 cars, and I think they actually apparently did think about it, from what I was told. And the M3s didn't have air conditioning, and that was sort of the death knell. That they one was refitted, it was very expensive, and it was just not and considering what we lived through with the M4s. Keeping the M3 would probably been a good thing. I mean, the M4s have been clunkers, unfortunately. They're going to be retired, way before they should. Of course, if SEPTA has money, which is another story these days.
As you said, the AC refit was full custom. Those cars would not have taken a standard Liebert unit on the roofs.
Yeah. As far as
you may have mentioned this in the last presentation, but what cars are preserved from this area or this system?
The bridge line, there were 26 in the fleet. I think there are 2 up at Seashore, and there might be, was Rock Hill made? I'm trying to think. Somebody else locally has one. So those those were the cars that PATCO took as their maintenance cars that hung around longer than the rest of the fleet. So I know of those 3, but I don't know of any others. But and I think of the 2 at Seashore, 1 is preserved, and one is sort of the organ donor for the other. So it's one operable or one usable car stuff.
Okay.
Let's see. There's some. Dave's got a lot of comments in here like that, so that's all right.
Yeah. And if anyone has one, if they want to unmute, feel free to pipe in. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just going through. It keeps pushing me back to.
Oh.
One.
Yeah. Probably every time somebody sends a new one.
Okay. Tom Letter says Russ Jackson told me why the cars were renumbered. Don't remember why. That's a good question. I don't know. I've heard a couple of answers on that, but I don't know. Nobody says it's this or it's that. Yeah. One of the bridge line cars is sitting in the Fern Rock yard right now. I think it's 10. Is it 1026? I forget. It's one of the original cars, but SEPTA is just sort of letting them sit there and deteriorate. Unfortunately, there's one of each Broad Street car up there that hasn't gone anywhere. Yeah. All right. Could I revisit the Camden, South Jersey issue? Yeah. Like I said, part of it was trains and grade crossings and dangerous. And Camden is like any big city. It has its issues. And a lot of people that live further out in South Jersey grew up in Camden or work in Camden. And, they were afraid that having a transit line that made it easier for people to get to where they lived was not desirable. that they just saw this bringing the crime that was in Camden down, just like any other big city. And it really hasn't happened. But again, it's more perception. It could be racial. I won't comment much more on that. But yeah, there's a lot of things that go along with that. And like I said, the Atlantic City line, there was a lot of opposition that got built. The opposition has pretty much disappeared. It's just one of those, nobody. It's the old NIMBY thing. Like you just don't want somebody else. So it's unfortunate, but it's there. But all right. I think I'm going back through the other way. If there are extensions, who will fund them? That's probably why we don't have extensions, Tom. It's like the people who pay car tolls object to this. Their tolls subsidizing PATCO, but again, it takes more cars off the road. There's a way you can look at that. But a lot of what came down to the extensions is just they're very expensive. But if you build a PATCO if you build this to PATCO standards, which are very high standards, and you have to grade separate. There's no grade crossings. High platforms, ADA access. It just starts to ring up the cash register here. So, and I think the RPA itself, that's one of the reasons they liked the other lines coming along to sort of feed PATCO, because they have to operate PATCO, and it is an expensive operation. But it also comes down to, if you expand it, the bridge line, it doesn't operate at capacity right now, but pretty close to it in the peak hour. And one of the issues in the off-peak we talked about in the last presentation was the storage. If you only got a yard at one end, but the load point and the PM peak is at the other end. So if you go down to the Locust Street subway in the midday, there's a lot of trains stored there, and one track is in service, which then limits the headways to a single track. But that's the only way to really run this efficiently in the peak hours. So if you added another line in there, you just double that problem, unless you really expand. And then the expansions to the Philadelphia side would have provided a lot more storage capability that you would add on tracks or whatever. So you could lay up trains at that end. But of course, neither of those got anywhere. So that didn't happen. But you do have tail tracks at the end. 15th and 16th is the last platform. The subway goes to about 18th Street. So there's some tail track capability. But again, you can't store the trains that you need there to get out in the peak. So that becomes the impediment of extending.
David Warner has his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, so I see that there's a comment in here, which I think I heard you mention about why the cars were renumbered.
Yeah.
I can tell you why the cars were renumbered. The cars were renumbered specifically out of 3 digits into 4 digits, so that there was no way a dispatcher could accidentally put old cars and new cars together in one train. So that was the reason behind 3 to 4 digits. The reason the married pairs were put into the series that they were was so that we could keep the records of the cars themselves consistent across the rebuild, because the structure stayed the same, and every one of the cars had its own little map of what the car structure looked like, because when the cars had come from Bud, they had some imperfections that needed to be fixed, which they were very good about fixing. The married pairs, we didn't really care that much about being able to track 01 and 02 and being together. If they indeed put them together, God bless them, but we didn't care about that. And by we, I do mean me. I will go on record saying these numbers were my choice.
Yeah. I that's one of the stories I heard. Like I said, there were variations of it. And I also heard that some of the married pairs came back mismated, and they're not permanently coupled. I mean, they're semi-permanently. So when their proper mates came back, that was sort of taken care of on the property. So I don't know. I know what I've heard, and I don't know the accurate story, but I appreciate hearing that.
And that makes sense from a perspective that they've got to get cars done.
Yeah.
And
they don't go out in order, and they come back in order. Yeah. But I know the general manager, and I remember while this was going on, I ran into him by chance, and I said, John, how's that going? And he said, well, not so good. He had come in that morning and somebody did connect an old train and a new train, a pair of each. And of course, they got to Lindenwold, and the dispatcher saw like, this has got to go. We can't do it. So he said they almost, something almost got out that way, but I don't know how compatible they were, or what would have happened. But he said that was
not very.
Somebody didn't pay attention to the numbers, so that was part of the learning curve. So would have been possible for a Bud to mate with a Vickers. Well, they made it from day one.
Well, but the Vickers cars were basically Bud cars assembled by Vickers.
Yeah,
they were.
Yeah, they were.
And we did we did on occasion do what we called a mixed marriage, and that was when we put a Bud A car with a Vickers B car. It did not really work as well as you would think, because the compatibility really existed at the coupler pin end, not the inner car connector end.
Yeah,
we learned that the hard way, I guess I could say, because it was hard to make it happen.
Yeah, but there were lots of trains that got out that had mixed consists. I mean, they were basically made to interoperate. So you would see that on occasion. And again, the spot
Bud and the Vickers.
Yeah.
Oh, there were no restrictions. They ran together all the time.
Yeah. The spotting was, you looked at that side skirting, and again, the newer cars didn't have the full skirt between the doors, basically, or between the trucks. So
yeah, and that still exists now, because we weren't going to spend money on adding a skirt.
All right.
You didn't want it. Well, yeah, we just
Kristen,
just like the cover over the single door you didn't like.
Yeah, I just
make it functional, make it inexpensive.
Yeah. And that was PATCO from day one. I mean, it was built to be functional. Some people might say cheap, but again, to get the line done and be functional. But Kristen, I wanted to say Dave gets an assist for this one. He's helping me out a lot. So
it's kind of like I don't know. The Q&A has become like a little panel. I like it.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, a lot of what I learned on this is anecdotal. So you get different people's spin on it, and often you get conflicting spins. So it's always good to know what really happened, but it's harder to get sometimes. But it is an interesting line. Yeah, if you ever get a chance to ride it, it's a nice little ride. It's not a long ride, but again, a speedy ride, and nice views of Philadelphia when you come across the bridge, which I mentioned. Some people will not sit on that side of the car because you look down and see water, and it just, I guess, gives them the jitters or something. But it's interesting to watch, when people get on, and some people, they don't realize that until they're out there, and then all of a sudden, you'll see somebody switch a seat to get to that bridge side. It's just, it's funny to watch. It's just, it's interesting.
Cool. All right. Any final questions before we wrap it up? I think that's a good stopping point. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bob. Thanks for your additions during the Q&A, David Warner. And thank you all of us for, thanks all of you for joining us on this presentation. And we hope to see you again soon. You're probably going to see Bob again soon, because Bob is, he must like this stuff, because he's got some more ideas coming down the pipeline. So you may see him again soon. Right, Bob?
I'm just a frustrated teacher, I guess. Yeah, I'll share the knowledge while I still have it, because I'm losing a little every day. But certainly have a couple more ideas we could bring. It's going to be the east side of the state, though. So again, Eagles fans, but I think it's of interest to everybody. That's and some of our history's out in the museum, so some of this will start to make a little more sense as we go through. But glad to do it. Glad to participate.
Perfect. Well, thank you again. And if you enjoyed this presentation, you can always go to patrolley.org/support to make a donation, become a member, become a volunteer, any and all of those things. All right. We hope you can join us in the coming weeks and months on Zoom or in person. Thanks again, and have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. See ya.